Hi, I'm Ryan McGuire. This is my final project for History of Rock, um, and I chose to do it on Steely Dan. So let's get started. So, all right, let's start off. Who is Steely Dan? Um, Basically, it's just they're one of the most legendary bands like ever, specifically from the 1970s. Um, they had six albums come out in the 70s and then another one in 1980. So 70s is exactly where they are. Um, Steely Dan's most known for, well, first off, they're a rock band, but it's more of like a jazz rock. Um, you you know if you heard it, they're like it's like a blues, jazz, old R&B plus rock combination. It really is like something to behold. It's something completely different. Um, who is comprised of Steely Dan? Simply put, it's just Walter Becker and Donald Fagen. They have musicians come and go, but it's just them two who are the main writers and the whole brains of the operation. Um, Going into more of who are they? So both of them are from the tri-state area. I say tri-state area, but Walter Becker's from up northern suburbia, New Jersey, and Donald is from Queens. Sad thing about Donald's life is that I think when he was 6 or when he was 8, his dad passed away, and then when he was 16, his mother passed away. So I guess that was really hard, and that turned him into not only playing music but writing music. So the two met at Bard College. When they met each other, they realized they both had similar influences, being jazz and blues and R&B. The artists include are Sonny Rollins, Charles Mingus, Miles Davis. You know, Miles Davis, whatever. Um, so they met at Bard. Um, Donald graduated. This is when they first started playing music together. They started playing music at Bard, which is so interesting. They went to Bard in the late '60s, and then their first album came out in 1972, and it was an instant hit. I just think it's so crazy that they started writing at college, and they started so late, and their music got so big. I don't know how that makes sense. Um, so yeah, so Donald graduated, Walter dropped out, they moved to LA, the dream. Um, so they started working as backing musicians and touring musicians for ABC Records, but they were more interested in writing their own music. So while they were at ABC, they met who would be their eventual producer, Gary Katz, and Gary Katz is the guy who got them together with other musicians and said, "All right, let's get our Steely Dan record out there and have the public hearing it." Um, and he pushed for ABC Records to pick them up, which they did. Um, I've lists of all the albums here when they came out. As you can see, Gary Katz produced all of them, uh, leading up to 2000. Um, yeah. So in their prime, Gary Katz was their producer the whole time, and they had the same engineer in Roger Nichols too. Um, so the thing with Steely Dan is that in 1974 they actually stopped touring altogether. And the reason they did this is because they they didn't really enjoy they didn't like touring at all. Um, and their main focus was their musical output, and they were really concerned with making it absolutely perfect. One of the sources I used had an example that they something as simple as like a microphone. They went through like dozens of them just to find the right one for, and then we used different microphones for different instruments. And I think like something simple as that is paying attention to details is so huge, and they were all about that. Also, I don't know what type of machine it was, but at one point, Donald and Walter had a $15,000 machine put together specifically for them to record music with. And I mean, in the 70s, I'm guessing $15,000 wasn't necessarily cheap at all. Um, Furthermore, about their perfectionism, um, they they didn't have. This is why they didn't have any band members, or they had band members when they started out, but one of them said that they didn't want to have to focus on other musicians. The two of them just wanted to focus on writing for themselves and having people perform it at insane level, insane level to match the perfection they wanted. Um, so they went through countless member, countless number of band members. When I was looking up the producer of all of these, all the musicians, um, all the musicians listed under each each album, every list would get longer and longer and longer. So like with Can't Buy a Thrill, it was only a few, but then by the time Asia came out, it was I don't know, probably at least 25 people on it to get the horn section right and all the guitar right and everything. And there's also a rumor that on one of their songs they had seven guitarists come through to get a solo right. Seven guitarists. It took hours and hours to get it right. Um, but yeah, and as you can see in, so they came out with all these albums in the 70s, and then 1980 they stopped. That's because that's because Walter had gotten in an accident, and then he was handicapped. He was in a wheelchair. He was on pain medication, and then after that, that led to his heroin addiction, which he struggled with for a long time. And also, he just, I think, as to help himself heal, he moved to Maui, which is in Hawaii, and he just like he lived out his days there, just like hanging out, surfing, playing music. He was just a 1980s hippie. I mean, he got rich in the 70s from his music, and then in the 80s, I guess he was just hanging out. In Hawaii, I mean, that's the dream, huh? um, all right, so next I'm going to talk about how they were influential on other artists and music in general. So they had this jazz chord that, well, it was jazz chord, and they brought it over to rock, but with their own spin on it. And the way it sounded was almost addictive. Yeah, so a lot of their music has this, and you can hear why. I'm gonna play this music video that better explains it. Because I mean, I took a few music theory classes, but I mean, you know. Also, if people had music theories with Professor Carter, he wrote. I want to say he wrote a dissertation on Steely Dan, which and their music theory. I think that's crazy. It's probably had a lot to do with this. Um, so here this is.
Parents are quick to protect. Raid! Just like Raid, Ant, and Roach.
She wants you bad. You like her, right? I'm not even sure what I like. Some guys like.
Washington Post interview how he modeled his horns after Oliver Nelson. The mu major chord, they called it that. A specific chord voicing that swaps a second degree note for a tonic note in a major chord. For example, if you take the C major chord C, G, C, E, and you switch the second C for a D note, you've made a C mu major chord. And you can hear mu majors all throughout Steely Dan's music, like in the first chorus of Black Cow, the chorus of Don't Take Me Alive, even right here in their first album on Fire in the Hole. I'd love to run out now. And it should be noted that even though Steely Dan squeezed the mu major...
Yeah, so basically that was at the basis of all their albums. I mean, um, absolutely legendary. Yeah. Alright, so this is stuff more relative to their time. I picked two songs that are relative to the time they were at when they came out. So first is 1975. In 1975, they came out with the song "Daddy Don't Live in That New York City No More." That's because at the time in the 70s, New York City was basically a war zone. A lot of Republican presidents were coming into power, so they'd stop a lot of funding, so it just got really bad. Subways, typical like 70s New York, like subway cars were graffitied. There were like no public restrooms. There was over 1 million people were on welfare at the time. Yeah. So this picture is I want to say it's Jimmy Carter or President Ford in the Bronx. I want to say that just looks like a war zone. I mean, like seriously. This over here is a pamphlet that people were handing out to visitors at the airports on planes when they would get off. And the pamphlet, this is the cover. People would get this as they arrived in New York City. Like, that's terrifying. And on the inside was a guide on how to survive in New York without getting robbed and stuff. So like, there was one that said you shouldn't be out past 6 p.m. and it said you should only stay in Manhattan, and it said not to trust hotels, said not to leave stuff in cars. I mean, and this quote like says why. I guess it made sense. Although, look how terrifying that is. But the quote says, it's from one of my sources. It says that murders in the cities have over doubled in the past decade. Thefts and assaults more than doubled. Rapes and burglaries more than tripled in that same period. Robberies have gone up a tenfold. That's crazy. All right, I'm running. I have 1 minute left. So, my second song was Asia off the album Asia. It was at the time. There was a big influx of Asian Americans. And being that Steely Dan at the time lived in Los Angeles, they were at the hotbed for this. That also led at the time there were also all these Asian protests for peace, and there was a lot of growing influence of Asian culture on Americans. It also mentions dude ranches were at the time were becoming really similar. Yeah. So this is my that's my presentation. I hope you enjoyed. This is my We're Excited.